Hi, and welcome to Tango Topics Music Exercise Series. I'm Miles Tangos. This is a 10-part series on the building blocks of how to listen to the music and what to listen for using a few exercises that I teach my students. As our base today, we'll be using the song Mi Dolor, which translates roughly from Spanish to English as My Sorrow, which is sometimes mistranslated as My Pain. Why is it mistranslated? Because the word dolor in Spanish means pain. So if you run this, say, through Google Translate, you'll get the literal translation, which almost never happens. So when translating, it's usually the colloquial version that we're after and not the literal. So in this case, not pain, but sorrow. So, my sorrow, or mi dolor. Today's agenda is as follows. Section 1, a metronome exercise in two parts. Section 2, listening to the song. Section 3, the orchestral anecdotes. Section 4 is working with the beat. Section 5 is respecting the pauses. That's far more important than you might realize. Section 6 is the beat and the pause together. And finally, Section 7 is hearing the singer. Let's get started. Section 1, a metronome exercise. Dun, dun, dun. As you may have realized by now, tango music is incredibly complex and multi-layered. As a result, it's really easy to get lost in the music and what we're doing as well as what we're listening to. This is one reason why I stress having a very clear understanding of where the beat is and, more importantly, what it is. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a tempo at about 60 beats per minute, or BPM, and then tap that out. You could walk it out as a possibility, but in this case, we're going to tap it out. And remember, under all circumstances or any circumstances, no looking at the screen. That kind of sort of defeats the whole purpose. I use an app on my devices called Tempo. There's a free version and a paid version for iOS and Android phones or tablets. You can find a link down below in the description. So let's try this out. All you're going to do is you're going to tap out the beat that you hear. Yes? Make sense? Really simple. All right, we're going to do that one more time, only what I'm going to do this time is I'm actually going to tap out that beat with you, and you see that little graphic right there? It's about to disappear in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, bye-bye. Yes, really simple. All right, let's press on. We're actually going to do that a whole bunch more times, but only this time we're going to add something to it. And this is where we add the second layer of our exercise today. One way that we can create, or I should say another way that we can create clarity, is to use a variation of that metronome exercise known as the dropped beat exercise to help us to infer where the beat is at. You'll see why this exercise is really useful considering today's song, Mi Dolor. In this exercise, we're going to set the metronome for about 10 beats per measure, but we're going to remove not one, but 2 of the beats, so you can, as you can see on the screen. By the way, both the free version as well as the paid version of Tempo have this feature. However, in the free version, you can only set 4 beats of the measure as a maximum, so you'll just have to drop 1 and infer where that second beat is. So you're only going to basically get to use a 4-beat measure and not 10. So basically, all you have to do here is to tap along and then infer where that missing beat is at. It does not get any more difficult than that, I swear to God. Wink. So I'm going to remove 2 beats on the screen, just like this. And then we're going to start. Ready? 1, 2, oh, wait. I should point out to you, it's very, very important that you not count beats or look at the screen. Again, what you're trying to do is to infer where those missing beats are at. It's also helpful that if you have a friend that can change where the beat is at, as well as to monitor you hitting that missing beat, that's even better. Tempo, sadly, unfortunately, does not have this capability. If you know of an app that actually has this capability, then leave a link in the comments below. All right, let's get started. Yes? All right. We're going to do that one more time, only this time I'm going to take out me tapping, and I want you to try it on your own. Make sense? You'll notice that I kind of sort of changed it up a little bit. That I did that same thing that I suggested a little while ago, where if you had a friend that you could swap out those missing beats, well, I did that for you so that you could actually see what that sounds like, and more importantly, gave you an opportunity to play with the idea. All right. The reason why we do this is multi-layered. Most notably is that we want to train ourselves to not only keep time, but actually teaching ourselves to infer where that missing beat is at. And as you'll soon see in a little bit, this skill comes in really handy. So let's move on to the next section. All right. Section 2 is listening to the song. Before we go any further, my humble apologies ahead of time for my atrocious pronunciation and gringo accent. I am sorely out of practice like you will not believe. Today's selection of Mi Dolor is a tango at about 60-61 BPM, beats per minute, depending on how you calculate it, as well as the shellac transfer that was used to create the recording that we have today. More on this later in another episode. There are multiple versions of this song, about 9 or 10 actual clear recordings of this song by some of the more popular orchestras like Alfredo Gabi, Angel Vargas, Alfredo de Angelis, Osvaldo Pugliese, as well as Juan D'Arienzo, just to name drop a bit. Actually, truth be told, I'm going to play two versions of for you of this stuff. One is this is D'Arienzo's version, which was recorded on December 14th, 1972, with Osvaldo Ramos.
Vuelvo de tierras muy lejanas donde ayer fuera a buscar olvido a mi dolor, consuelo a mi alma que sufrió al querer en los...
Make sense? All right, let's press on. The next version I want to play for you is the Angelis version, which was actually done as an instrumental, recorded on May 23rd, 1957. So let's give that. Let's listen to that one. Radically different. All right. The more popular one is today's pick, and honestly, it is arguably the more popular one. Some people really like the De Angelis version. I'm more partial to the Caro version, hence the reason why we're playing it today. So let's play the Caro version. This version was recorded on October 27th, 1950, with Orlando Very singing. So let's listen to that. right, that's a tiny little taste. The instructions for this part are really simple. All you have to do is listen to the music. Really simple. But there is a tiny little catch, and there's always a catch with this stuff. And it's a really simple thing. You can't move while you're doing it. No tapping, no snapping, no foot tapping, no snapping of the fingers, not moving a muscle, an eyelid, not even a hair follicle. All you want to do is listen. Use your ears and your brain. I'll explain why I'm not having you move in just a little bit. Ready? So let's try that one more time. Make sense? All right, let's try that one more time. What you're trying to do here is to focus on the music and what's going on. Part of the reason you're not moving, or I'm having you not move, is so that you learn to focus on the music and try not to discern the beat or try to figure it out. Every time that you try to do that, what you're basically doing is robbing yourself of the ability to hearing how the music is structured, hearing the A-B structures, hearing the call and responses that are built into the music, hearing the repeating phrases and ideas, and really ultimately how you're going to dance to it. So basically what you're wanting to do is to stay as still as humanly possible. No moving. Yes? All right. But more important than that is really just what you're trying to do is really start to focus on hearing all of the music all at once, thereby developing your focus and attention skills. Let's play this one more time. Make sense? All right, let's press on. Section 3. In this section, we're going to talk a little bit about the orchestra and the man that created that orchestra. In tango music history, Julio de Caro was a seminal figure for a number of reasons. One, because he started the careers of a few orchestral leaders that we think of today, like Pedro Lorenz and Anibal Troilo. And still another, because he influenced many more with his ideas, including Juan D'Arienzo. And still one more because of his sound, his ideas on tango music, which would set a mold for a very specific style of tango music, one of which others would gravitate towards and then later on emulate. Julio de Caro was born on December 11th, 1899, to Jose de Caro de Sica and Matilda Valeri, in what is now known as Bartolome Mitter's neighborhood. Here's a factoid for you. Julio was born on the same day as another tango luminary, just a few years apart, Carlos Gardel. In Milan, Jose, Julio's father, worked and studied at the La Scala Conservatory, but when he emigrated to Buenos Aires, he opened what became known as one of the best music stores that sold instruments, parts, and lessons in all of Buenos Aires, while his mother was a working singer at the same time. Julio was the second of 12 children, and two of his brothers would later go on to join his orchestras, Francisco and Emilio. From a very early age, Julio and his brother Francisco went to study with maestros and musical conservatories. As time passed, they were soon performing at recitals and gatherings. Both brothers completely immersed themselves in their musical studies and listened to nothing but classical music at their father's insistence. He wouldn't have them listening to or even considering that popular music that was all the rage at the time, tango music. Clearly, they had a passion for music and they were on track to perform music professionally, or so one would think. Which makes all of what happened to Julio in 1915 all that much more strange. It was because of the incident that I'm about to relate to you that Julio would go left when his father wanted him to go right. So here's what happened. Julio was just 16 years old when he snuck out to play second violin for a tango orchestra, for which he was paid the kingly sum of 5 pesos. However, when his father found out about it, he went absolutely ballistic and forced Julio to give back the 5 pesos and then punished him for 8 straight days with only bread and water to eat. The reason? Not because Julio had lied to his father, which he did, but because Jose wanted Julio to go to medical school and to become a doctor and not to become a musician for hire. Around the same time, Julio and Francisco were introduced to Roberto Firpo, as well as Eduardo Arolas and a few others. They started playing out behind their father's back and getting deeper and deeper into tango music, which they absolutely, wholeheartedly, categorically loved. So by the time 1917 rolls around, he has clearly been infected by Firpo's ideas and arrangements, but does not end up playing with him, but instead gets an invitation from Arolas to come and join his orchestra. He told Arolas what had happened the last time he had played popular music, so Arolas, rather than wanted to nip things in the bud, went directly to speak with Julio's father in the hopes of avoiding any problems. Yeah, like that was going to go well. Jose said adamantly, wholeheartedly, categorically, and definitively, no. However, this did not stop Julio, because by the time he was 18, without his father's knowledge, he joined a tango orchestra for 2 weeks to fill in for somebody else, and that's when he saw his future. And basically, that was that. He then contacted Arolas and asked to join his orchestra as a violinist, and Arolas accepted, and that's when all hell broke loose. Jose, Dad, when he found out what was going on, that his son was playing popular music and that he had abandoned his classical music studies, he threw Julio out of the house to live on the street. That lasted for a hot 10 seconds because he then went on tour with Arolas, soon playing out in the cabarets and the parties with the orchestra in Montevideo, Uruguay. In the end, Julio, and then later Francisco, who ended up following in the same pathway, would play with Arolas for the next 2 years solid before returning to Buenos Aires. They composed more than a few tango standards, such as Don Antonio, Malapinta, and La Cañera, just to name a few. When Arolas returned to Argentina to continue his tour, Julio was supposed to go with. But they had a tiny little disagreement about payment, and that's when Julio went, he left the orchestra. About the same time, Pedro Mafia, who you should totally stop right here, right now, and go listen to because he is the bandonista's bandonista, he left Roberto Firpo's orchestra for exactly the same reason. So during this time, Julio, Pedro Mafia, the violinist Jose Rosito, I think that's his name, who came with Mafia when he left, and the pianist Jose Rosati, I think that's right, formed a quartet, and for a time they were very, very successful. However, the quartet would eventually disband, not because of a disagreement over money or advertisements or personalities, but because of the offers they were getting individually. So Pedro Mafia returned to Firpo's orchestra after working things out with Firpo. Jose de Caro and Jose Rosito joined Osvaldo Fresedo's first orchestra and then went on tour with them to the United States. Julio would end up writing a few songs that would end up debuting with Fresedo, like Todo Corazon. But eventually, when the tour was over, Julio came back to Buenos Aires. It was the summer of 1923, and the very famous composer and pianist Juan Carlos Cobian was forming an orchestra with Pedro Mafia. Is there anybody else in Buenos Aires? With Pedro Mafia, Luis Petrocelli on the bando, Umberto Costanzo on the double bass, and this guy's name that I can't pronounce, as well as Julio on the violins. They performed far and wide and even ended up going to the United States to record and perform there as well. More on this later, and you'll see why this is important. However, by the end of that year, Cobian completely disbanded the group, and Julio was basically out of work. It was Francisco, his brother, that got hired by a wealthy businessman, put together an orchestra for a few end-of-the-year carnivals. So with that money in hand, Francisco hired his brother Julio, yay! and then with Pedro Mafia, good Lord, it's like there's nobody else, Petrocelli and Leopoldo Thompson, I think is right, as well as Emilio De Caro, put together a really class act that was impeccably dressed in tuxedos like this one pictured here, where they played very sharp and danceable music. In 1924, just a few weeks after the aforementioned carnival parties, the group decided that they would form their orchestra under the name and the direction of, say it with me, Julio De Caro. So as that happened, they got a series of gigs that would end up changing their lives and the very fabric of tango music. The first one was a monthly gig for a high tea, for which they got paid the monster sum of 6,000 pesos for the Vogue Club. And the second was for an RCA recording contract. About a week or so before the orchestra debuted at the Vogue Club, both Pedro Mafia and Luis Petrocelli pulled out of the orchestra over who was named what in the advertising. This caused, as you might imagine, some monster gnashing of teeth and pissing off everybody involved. However, on the eve of that debut, Pedro Mafia returned, citing that he needed the money and that he'd stick around until he found another gig. At the same time, with Petrocelli gone and literally an afternoon before the debut, Julio still had a hole at the second bando slot. Enter Pedro Laurenz. Laurenz was a no-name bandonista at the time, and De Caro was introduced to him via a mutual friend and loved the way that Laurenz played, and right there on that spot, hired him right there in that moment for that performance at the Vogue Club that very night. Just as an important side note, the partnership between the very young Pedro Laurenz and the very established and well-respected Pedro Mafia seemed a bit presumptuous by any standard. And even Laurenz couldn't believe that A, De Caro had hired him, and that B, he was playing next to his tango idol. However, the two became fast friends and even started playing out together at venues and eventually recording their teamwork. Their partnership became the stuff of legend and renown. As it happened, Julio De Caro and Pedro Mafia repaired their very strained relationship because of the partnership with Laurenz and Pedro Mafia. That partnership would then go on to later jumpstart Lorenz's career, which would in turn create a library of music that we cannot even consider not dancing to today. De Caro is usually depicted in most photographs with a very strange instrument like this one. The instrument is kind of sort of like the duck-billed platypus. It's not one thing and it's not another. In this case, this is the violin cornet. It's not a violin and it's not a cornet. It's actually both. When De Caro was touring and playing in the United States with Cobian's orchestra, he met a very famous jazz musician, Paul Whiteman, who was recording for RCA Victor as well. Whiteman had the opportunity to hear De Caro and was taken aback with him. After Julio went back to Argentina, Whiteman, while recording, came across this instrument, the violin cornet. He liked the sound of it. He liked that it increased the level of the violin, while at the same time it added a human-like tone to the cornet. All the while, the two of them were communicating back and forth, and he had this thought in the back of his mind to present Julio with a violin cornet the next time that they met up. So, as luck would have it, a few years later, Whiteman was passing through Argentina as a representative for RCA Victor, and he had with him, say it with me, the violin cornet. So he handed it to Julio to try, and then Julio basically found it kind of sort of difficult to adapt to at first. But eventually, he found that he liked the sound of it and what he could do with it, and that became his signature instrument, and that's how we ended up with Julio De Caro's violin cornet and the iconic photos that you see of him today. All right, so in March of 1931, Julio took his orchestra on the road to Europe, where he played for the Prince of Savoy in Belgium, and eventually culminated that tour in Paris. At the insistence of the Argentine ambassador, he and his orchestra played at the Sorbonne, as well as playing out at several high society parties and eventually gatherings at the Rothschilds. So he eventually went back to Argentina, back to Buenos Aires, and he reformed a new orchestra with, among others, Pedro Laurenz and a very young and very talented bandonista, Annabel Troilo. Over the next 2 decades, Julio would go on to win tango awards for his music and many accolades, as well as compose and record some of the most iconic music for tango. His work as a composer was extremely important because he incorporated a refined style in an orchestral interpretation of tango. Basically, it's a style that combined all of the wealth of his academic upbringing with the rhythmical canjengue that is characteristic of tango music. Let me put that into layman's terms. Basically, the best way to characterize what that style is that it is an expressionistic of the sentimental or melancholic, while being incredibly polished, while at the same time being very, very relaxed or lazy. This style is evident and on display in mostly every song in Caro's library. So I want to play just a few of those examples for you. So remember what you're listening for here. It's a laziness, a laconicness, I think is the right way of saying that. It's a very relaxed, laid-back style, but it's very, very polished. And then there's this one. One you might be very familiar with. This style was replicated across many orchestras as time went by, and one really obvious one that should be, well, painfully obvious to you, Pedro Larraín's. So what made his music so unique was that Julio de Caro included passages for the violin as well as for the solo piano, as well as countering between two or more violins, as well as bandoneons. So in 1954, Julio de Caro would retire from actively recording and composing, and he would spend the next 20 to 30 years in retirement, occasionally coming out and to record here and there. But on December 11th, 1978, his birthday, this day was inaugurated as National Tango Day. And on that very first inauguration, 15,000 people stood up and sang happy birthday to the man that changed tango music forever. While Mi Dolor was recorded later in De Caro's life, it contains the very elements of that iconic style of lazy but refined music. It combines the rhythmical with the academic in a very unique way, which you'll hear in just a little bit. On March 11th, 1980, Julio de Caro passed away in Mar del Plata, and his remains are interred at Chacarita Cemetery, where he's buried next to his brother Francisco. All right, so that's basically a little bit of the tango history, just a little bit. Today's exercise, we will deal with the beats and the pauses, and a very tiny small amount with the singer. But really, the bulk of the components of what we're hearing is the beats and the musical pauses. These are the base elements that we must become very fluent in, first and foremost, before we can actually begin to interpret the music. Now, I believe, and some may disagree with me here, that you can't necessarily interpret the music until you've mastered hearing the component elements of that music, or in this case, the beats and the pauses, and more importantly, the structure of the song. I do believe that you can interject ideas and become inspired by that music, but ultimately that inspiration may, being the operative word, may become marred without some level of structure. And that's what these exercises are all about, creating the base structure so that you can begin to interpret the music. Make sense? All right, so let's dive right into Mi Dolor. Section 4, working with the beat of the song. In this section, we're going to tap out the beat together. I know I usually don't do that, but in this case, you will see why this is kind of sort of important. I'm going to warn you now, this one is a little challenging, and I don't mean, wink here. It really requires you to stay with the beat. The reason why it's challenging is the fact that the violins are playing on what is sometimes referred to remember those long stringy notes? Well, you're going to hear that almost immediately. You're going to have to infer where those beats are almost immediately. So as a result, right from the get-go, right from the beginning of the song, you're going to have to keep time internally. Ready? Let's go. Ready? 1, 2, here it comes, 3. So you'll notice I'm beating the crap out of my thigh here. I'm not actually beating the crap out of my thigh, even though I'm going to end up with a black and blue mark tomorrow morning. It's so that you can actually hear that slap through the microphone. So this microphone is recording that slap. We're going to do that one more time. And I'm going to warn you right now, it's more than a little challenging. It's going to take you a couple of tries to get this one right. I've been at this every day for almost 15 years, and even I have a problem with this one. And there are a couple of reasons why, which we'll get into in just a little bit. So let's try that one more time. And again, challenging, but doable. And remember that exercise I mentioned a little while ago about where you had to infer the beat, the metronome exercise, where I had you dropping that beat every once in a while? This is where that stuff plays itself out. That's why we did this exercise. All right, so let's try this one more time. All right, I want to stop right there, and we're going to rewind the tape, just rewind the audio just a little bit, because I want to help you to hear those places where I swear to God you're going to lose your proverbial mind and thinking that you're doing X when in fact it's actually Y is going on. So I want to show you what is going to happen for most people when they hear this. So this is what's going to happen, and it's going to be wonky. I'm telling you right now. So this is. So did you hear that almost immediately? I missed the first beat. Secondarily, I missed that section of the beat where the violins came in and they did something, and I had to infer where the beat is. And I quite literally just went, okay, there should be a beat there. And that's not what we're looking for. What we're looking for is to infer the proper time between what should be that next beat. So I want you to hear something, and this is the important component here. Listen carefully. You will hear two beats, one right after the other. The third one you're going to have to infer. Listen carefully. 1, 2, 3. Infer, get, infer, got. Yes? All right. So basically what you're trying to do here is try to fill in those missing gaps with what you think that beat should be. And where we tend to get a little confused is where we're hearing all that other stuff in the music, and it tends to make you go. All right, so here's a really simple exercise. All you have to do here, and this is really hard, it's a simple exercise, but it's really hard to do. So all you're going to do here is this. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's it. That's it. That's all that we're looking for. Notice the amount of time that it went from 1, 2, 3, and 4. And practice that fourth one all by its lonesome. One more time. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's it. That's all we're looking for. All I want you to do is to practice that fourth inferred beat. That's it. That's all. One more time. All right, so one more thing before we stop, before we move on to the next section. You'll notice that sometimes what I'm doing is that I will either nod my head or tap my foot at the same time. When you're dealing with troubling songs like this, and I admit this is a troubling song for me, what tends to end up happening is a disconnect between that head nod and the slapping of one's thigh. I know it sounds like I'm beating myself to death here. What tends to end up happening is that there's a tiny little disconnect there. So essentially what you want to do is get those things into alignment. So if you need to, pay attention to the head nodding and not necessarily the beat slapping. Watch what happens. One more time. Make sense? All right. One more thing before I move off of this topic. There is actually an accent on the piano fill. If you're listening very, very carefully, you'll hear an accent on one of the piano fills, just as we're coming out of, or into the next beat. So it should be 1, 2, 3, piano fill, accent, right there. Yes, that's how you know that you're listening to that beat. It's a marked accent note. Some of us that are a little bit more challenged will have a hard time with that one. Some of us that are musically trained will go, oh, I hear that, Miles. I don't have a problem with this at all. The rest of us, read that as Miles, have a tiny little problem with that one. All right, let's press on. Section 5, hearing the pauses of the song. In this section, we're going to tap out the pauses or rests of the music. In tango music, there are 5 common pause types. Type 1 is a cessation or stop. Type 2 is an instrumental flourish, sometimes represented with a violin trill or piano roll, as you'll hear in the song. Type 3 is a diminished note, which does not happen in this example, so we can ignore it here. It doesn't exist in other examples. Type 4 is a musical paragraph, which serves double duty. It is a pause in and of its own right, and it also serves as the boundary marker between 2 different musical ideas, which is marked here by a shave and a haircut bump bump, better known as bump ba-dum bump bump bump. It's the bump bump that we hear that ends the musical paragraph that makes us go, yeah, that's one idea. And then you'll hear this sharp shift into another musical idea. And then we have a type 5 pause, which is what we call the singer's breath. And we'll hear a little bit of that later on. Truth be told, there are actually 13 different types of musical pauses, and in this song, we're only, one of those remaining 8 types is present here. It has no type because, honestly, I never went through and typed it. And it doesn't occur with enough frequency except in orchestras like Pugliese, or in this case, the Caro. However, we're only dealing with the 5 common ones here because that's what you'll hear more often than not. Hence the reason why they're called the 5 common pauses. You'll find an article on this on tangotopics.com that talks about these ideas in detail, so go look at the link in the description for more information. So in this song, we're going to hear a type 1, a type 2, an odd one that I'll go like this for, and then a type 4 in the section of the song that we've heard so far. All right, so let's play this. What I'm going to do is use a marked version of this. So what you're going to hear is me saying the word pause. And it's going to make you go, there's a pause there? Yeah, there's a pause there. So when you hear me say the word pause, guess what? That's a pause.
Pause. Pause. pause, 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 pause.
Got it? All right, we're going to do that one more time. And this time without the marked pauses. And every time that I hold up my hand, guess what? That's a pause or a rest. This part is insanely difficult. I'm not going to lie to you. This entire section of hearing the pauses is more difficult than you can possibly imagine. And the reason I say that is because it's going to take you a good 10 or 15 million times to hear those pauses on repeat. Okay? So let's try this one more time. And this time, remember, every time I hold up my hand, that's a pause. Got it? All right. So I'm going to point out a couple of things about this. First, I'm going to go through and type those pauses for you. And then we're going to talk about that really odd one I pointed out a little bit earlier. And then you'll see where the really odd one is. All right, so let's go through and talk a little bit about that, because that odd one doesn't happen all that often. It's kind of sort of like a type 3, but there is no type for it. So we lump it into that group of 8 that are kind of sort of over there and, la la land. And this is why I'm doing this, because there is no type for it. So I want to actually play it for you. I think it's the 4th pause in. So let's play it out. That's a type 2 right there. That's a type 1. Type 1. That one right there. That one's a really odd one. You might almost think that that's an instrumental flourish. The reason why it's not an instrumental flourish or a musical piano roll is because it's not fast enough. It's too slow. It's basically note, 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 note. And sometimes you'll hear this as note, 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 note up. And sometimes you'll hear it as note, note, note. Yes? So it's not really a thing. It's a good thing. It might be, but it's not be, but we still count it as a musical pause. All right. Now there's one more oddity here that happens, which is kind of sort of awkward. You'll notice that every time that I've done this so far is that you'll see that I do this in this really weird place. And the reason why that is because I believe or think that there should be a musical pause there when in fact that there isn't one. So I'll play it out for you. Right here. Yes, it's where the music goes up and you're thinking, yes, there should be a pause there. Wait, there isn't a pause there. And that's because there isn't one, but one does happen almost immediately after when the notes come down. So listen one more time. Right here. Right there. Yes? So you'll notice that in the sequence that a pause happens, and then a few notes happen, and then another pause happens almost immediately. You're going to find this happens more often than not, more times than you can quite literally, honestly, shake a stick at. Pauses don't necessarily happen in grouped, or I should say, grouped order, better known as, an 8-count beat or 4 counts or 2 counts. Sometimes they happen in really weird places. This is one of those times when it happens in a really weird place. So you're going to ask me, Miles, why do we need to hear the pauses? To which I'm going to say, I am so glad you asked that question. There are actually 3 reasons why. Reason number 1, this is Tango's singular reset button, meaning that you can and should reset the embrace and or the couple, which is rather important because it prevents the dreaded racing around the floor that happens so often. Primarily, though, respecting the pauses, as it's called, is to prevent the couple from getting out of physiological alignment with each other. I'm sure you've all had this happen before, where your partner squeezes to hold you in place, and as the song wears on, the position gets even more and more and more and more unwieldy. So stopping at a pause to reset yourself and or your partner is, well, helpful, instead of trying to hold onto a position that is wholly untenable. Not to mention, it's also a logical place to engage in said reset, instead of stopping in the middle of a phrase, or which doesn't look so nice or fit musically at all. So, again, stopping at a pause, important. Reason number 2, this is a logical place for us to change our vocabulary choices from one idea to the next, thereby invoking a little bit of structure or order. For lead, that means changing our vocabulary choices at the pauses from, say, walk to ochos, or ochos to turns, or turns to crosses, and so on. For a follower, that would mean engaging in either an adornment or an embellishment at the pause to accentuate the trill of a violin or a piano roll, and or so on. Reason number 3, and this is probably the single more important point that unfortunately we're not going to get to in this series, is it is the beginning point of structure to create order with our dance so it doesn't look so haphazard, which happens more frequently than you might imagine. But rather what we're trying to do is create a one-to-one relationship so that what we're doing vocabulary-wise fits with what's happening in the music. This is also a place where once we've mastered this whole pause business, that we can actually begin to interpret the music creatively, but only at that point. So let's play this one more time. Let's move on. Section 6, engaging the beat and the pause together. In this section, we're going to tap out the beat and the pause together at the same time. This exercise is essentially doing 2 things at the same time, hearing the beat and then discerning the pause simultaneously. For some people, this is a lot like tapping your head and rubbing your belly at the same time. That's a little challenging for some of us, myself included. So here's a little tip that will make things a little easier for you. Remember this thought, and I'm going to say it twice. All pauses land exactly on a beat. One more time. All pauses land exactly on a beat. So, what we're trying to do here is it should be beat pause together, and not beat pause or pause beat, but rather it's beat, 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 beat pause, beat, 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 beat pause, beat, 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 beat pause. Got it? All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tap out the beat with my left, beating the hell out of my thigh, and we're going to indicate with my right. Mind you, I'm right-handed, so this is really challenging for me. All right, let's give this a try. Make sense? One more time. Here we go. There was much rejoicing. I swear to God, here's what you want to do. You want to rewind that like 500,000 times and redo that over and over and over and over again until you get it close to right. I'm not going to say to you, gosh, it has to be absolutely perfect. No, because you're going to make a whole lot of mistakes in there. Especially during that third one. I swear to God, I missed that one like 6 times when I was recording this one. All right, that said, let's press on. Section 7. Hearing the singer. In this section, we're going to listen to the singer very, very briefly. The reason why we're listening to the singer is so that A, you can hear a type 5 pause, i.e. the singer's breath, and B is so that you actually get a chance to hear Orlando Very because he has an absolutely gorgeous voice. We're going to play the section twice through. The first time so that you can actually hear it in its entirety without me marking it up in any way, shape, or form. And then the second time through so that you can actually hear where the pauses are at. Here's what you're listening for. Every time that the singer takes a breath, that's a pause. Ready? Let's try this.
Fui esclavo de tu corazón, a tus caprichos yo cedí y me pagaste con traición. Oh, curada mi alma de esta herida, pienso que nunca he de volver a mendigar tu querer.
Make sense? We're going to do that one more time. This time through, I'm going to mark out the pauses for you. Again, every time that the singer takes a breath, that's a pause.
Fui esclavo de tu corazón, a tus caprichos yo cedí y me pagaste con traición. Oh, curada mi alma de esta herida, pienso que nunca he de volver a mendigar tu querer.
Let's try that one more time. I want to explain a couple of things that are going on there. Item number 1 on this list is that what you'll hear sometimes from singers are elongated notes, yes? Every time that they take an elongated note or they stretch out the note, they have to take a breath at the end of that note, don't they? Well, guess what? That's a musical pause right there. So let's hear this. Pause. Pause.
A tus caprichos yo cedí.
Pause.
Y me pagaste con traición.
Pause.
Curada mi alma de esta
Make sense? All right. So pay attention to those long, stringy. Those are pauses. Make sense? All right. That is our exercise for today. That's about as clear as I can possibly make it for you. There's a whole lot more to this stuff. So basically all you want to do is play that stuff on repeat. If you'd like to become more familiar with this piece, and I strongly suggest that you do, you can find a link down below in the description so you can work on your practicing, your pauses, and your beat. Yes? You can also find a link below for Julio, Caro, and Orlando Very to learn more about them. I strongly suggest that you learn about the orchestras as well as their histories, understanding the men, their choices, and their histories themselves, as it will help you to understand the music that we all love dancing to. Links to all that stuff is down below, with a really good link to the translation from the words from the lyrics in Castellano to English. All right, that basically wraps it up for today. I hope you enjoyed this very free example of Julio de Caro and Orlando Very singing. Please hit the like button down below if you like this stuff. If you don't like this stuff, well, that's fine too. I can understand that. But also remember, if you really like this stuff, hit the subscribe button to see a whole lot more. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed this stuff, and I look forward to seeing you in class. Bye!